What's going on, everybody? You know what time it is. It is Friday afternoon here in Southern California. I am your California Jedi in costume for Halloween. If you don't like the California Jedi, well, blame KK. If you don't know who that is, go watch South Park. But Friday afternoon here in Southern California. It's Friday evening on the East Coast. It is late Friday or early Saturday over there in Europe. It might even be late Saturday wherever you are on the other side of the world. But wherever you are, you know what time it is. It is time for Cinema Crusaders, that show where we break down old movies, we talk about them, we try and expose you to new movies, to get a look at them, to maybe try something else, and see if you like it or you don't like it. And we have another one of those movies for you today. We are continuing on our theme where we take an actor from the previous film we covered and we move them forward or backwards into another movie, and we move on to that movie. So this time, we went from Aubrey Morrison in Life Force to Aubrey Morrison featuring in this movie in a smaller but significant part, because he is creepy, and we're going to get to him, in a movie called Wicker Man from 1973. And this movie was remade later. I believe it starred Richard Gere. This is the first time I saw this movie. I think it was the first time for at least one of our other Cinema Crusaders. And speaking of those Cinema Crusaders, I'm going to introduce them right now. So, the man who picked the movie out, he is a author and a writer as well as an educator. He is incredibly knowledgeable about all sorts of different comic-related matters, as are all of the Crusaders that I have the great honor of working with. I'm talking about none other, the man from Omen and Revelation Comics, Steve Shadewing Sellers. How you doing, Steve?
Not the bees, my eyes, not the bees. Okay, no, it's not that Wicker Man. Yeah. Although in some respects it's more entertaining, certainly more than the first third of the film. And I will say from the beginning that I apologize for recommending this movie to now. To be honest, it's not that bad. It turned out to be not that bad. The first third of this movie, I tried to get through, and because honestly, I had not seen this film going in. I was just looking to see, what was interesting that some of these cast members that had been in had been something that was suitable for Halloween, and I just kind of landed on the Wicker Man, and I was just trying to see if it was as good as its reputation was, and the answer is mixed, because the first third of the movie is this weird musical, which is just and if anybody who knows me knows that I cannot stand musicals. I do not like them. They don't make sense to me. I don't like the internal logic of them. I can't get into them. And this movie was a musical, and it was a horror to decide to sit through for 30 minutes. But then Christopher Lee shows up, and then suddenly the plot starts getting into gear. There's a lot less of that until the end and various parts in the middle. And then you start having an actual story, and you start to see where they're going with it. And I will say I was honestly surprised, because I thought there were plot holes in this movie, and I will point out some of them, but it turned out that the end twist actually explained them, which I do not normally expect from these movies. And I think I'm probably, because my expectations have been lowered by so many attempts to do twists and so many attempts, to subvert expectations. But this movie actually does, and I thought it did so at least in a way that salvaged the movie and made at least the last 2/3 of it more enjoyable. And I can appreciate now where it's coming from, even if there are parts I'm not really that fond of.
Yeah, I mean, we really got to give them credit for that, and we're going to talk about that, is that the story is tight. It's cohesive. It all fits together and comes together at the end. It is well written in that way. I also think it's a product of its time, the movie, but we'll get to that as well, because there's other stuff that I kind of want to mention about that. But before I do that, I have to introduce another Crusader. Before we do that, though, I'm going to say I wish well to Lance Lucero of Warehouse 9. He's at a film festival in Arizona at the moment, so good luck, Lance. We're all rooting and pulling for you. And with that, I'm going to introduce the man who not only brings sexy back, he personifies sexy. He personifies it on the screen. When he comes on the screen, all of us feel like we are on Somerset Isle, or whatever the name of that isle was, and we want to throw off our clothes with abandon. No, that's not true. But he is a great guy. He is a very talented artist. He does commissions available on DeviantArt. I'll let him throw out a shout for that if he wants. He also works with Braincross Press and has his own comics, Symbols of Liberty and Mr. Happy. I'm talking about none other than Jeff Barrese. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm bringing sexy back, and I'm too sexy for my hat. Too sexy for my hat. Well, how about that?
Very nice.
Right
said, Fred. Right said.
Right. I went from Timberlake to Fred. How about that?
Yep. There you go.
I think my views of this film are far more charitable than y'all's. And even after rewatching it for the first time in a very long time, I will agree with Steve that Steve was going bitching like, I fucking hate musicals. Like this is like, well, it's not really a musical, but I will say the problem with the first third is they purposely hold on the musical numbers too long. We were discussing in the backstage here that this is a very strange horror movie, and I do consider it a horror for a number of reasons. But at the same time, it's like a reality TV documentary / horror movie before they had reality TV. All of this naturalistic stuff is going on, even though you can tell like the songs are re-recorded in the studio. You're not getting nat sound like they tried to do with Beauty and the Beast and things like that. So without getting the nat or the native sound, I think that might have actually served them better if they'd done it like that. I think there would have been a little bit more appreciation for that. But the musical numbers do go on longer than they need to. And you are sort of inundated with the culture of this owl right at the beginning. And I can see why it got annoying for you guys. But I also think it was important to have those things. They just carried on too long because, like you said, I was immediately sort of on the side of Sergeant Howie as he gets to this very insular, very backward, very pagan isle, and he's trying to do the most righteous job you would think. He's trying to find a lost little girl. He's been he's been lured to this island. He thinks he's doing a right and noble thing, and he's it's 1973. He's just not puritanical, but it's still that period. He's got God on his side. He's got emancipation. All this is going on, and this island is a throwback to the barbarians that were basically conquered by Christianity over the generations. So there's all that going in there, and this clash of cultures is very fascinating to me. And by the time you get to it, the very erudite Lord Summerisle, who is like definitely, as Steve put it, the most interesting man in the room. You see this clash. The one guy sees everything very much in black and white, and the other guy's like, you need to open your mind. Like smoke a little doobie, sacrifice a child. It's all cool. It's groovy here. And watching these two butt heads, and the ultimate result of that is a truly horrifying experience once you get there. But you've got to be willing to get there. It is a bit of a ride.
Well, a couple things before I do a plot synopsis real quick. But I think I understand the singing, because Britain is a singing culture, especially tavern culture or village culture. It's like when you go to their soccer matches, you don't see
pub
that
singing,
here.
baby.
Yeah, people aren't just singing for the sake of singing, so it's a big deal. The other thing is that I said before I thought this was a movie of its time. I think this is a 60s movie that wasn't made or released in
1973.
Yeah, but it really has a 60s feel. I think a lot of the themes that they're talking about are coming out of the I kind of joked about it, but in some ways it's true. The hippie movement, the flower power movement, free love, a whole bunch of stuff. So, that's kind of what we're going at here. And, if you want to get a deep meaning into it, you start doing that literary analysis. We could talk about, there's a deeper meaning of the
It is the age of Aquarius on this island, isn't it?
Yeah. So, and then, we start pulling BS out of our asses, or we're being very deep in our analysis of the film, depending on which one you want to choose. So, but I see what they're going for. And I'm not going to say that the movie was a failure. It was just it was a huge departure. And I will tell you, it's a departure from Cinema Crusaders. Not that I'm minding, but I have seen more TNA in the last two films that I have for 3.5 years.
This movie had a lot in common with Life Force in certain ways.
Yeah.
I mean, not only like the first third not quite working. You have Aubrey Morris in both of them. I mean, you have this one charismatic character bringing the film together at the right time. All of these sort of elements, and also they all both feel like BBC productions.
Yeah. Well, and I will say right now, where Life Force had nudity, Wicker Man said, "Hold my beer." So yeah, they were like, "Oh, you want some nudity, huh?"
Got nudity,
So,
and we're going to add lots of wiggle to it.
Yeah. So
They get jiggly with it for sure.
yeah. Now, just as it's basic, and I'm not going to go into a whole lot of depth here. If you want a detailed plot synopsis, you can either go find an IMDb, or I do recommend that you watch a film because I think it's worth exploring. There's a lot of good stuff to take out of it. You could contrast it with the later remake too. But Jeff hit on a little bit where this policeman, we're introduced to him. He is a devout, church-going man who was up there speaking and preaching the word of the Lord and doing this stuff. And he's called away, and you see him flying. And he spent, in my opinion, way too long him flying over the with the song going over. But it's credits, so we'll give that to them. But he lands on this island, and the island is a isolated, insular community, and immediately the people start lying to him as he is searching for this young girl. In fact, they deny she ever existed. And eventually, it's like pulling teeth with these people. They come to find out, oh, well, we don't talk about her existing anymore because now she is dead, and her spirit is with nature, so... Yeah.
She is transmortified.
Yeah. In fact, there was a specific word for it. I forget what Christopher Lee uses at one point for being reborn. Parthenogenesis. Being born.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, the parthenogenesis was the girls jumping over the flame, hoping to be impregnated by the god of fire.
Immaculate conception. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So this is all going on, and eventually we run into, and he's digging into this mystery, and like I said, it's like pulling teeth with these people, and he's getting bits and pieces here and there, and he knows. I mean, and I will say this: there's a lot of great suspense building up as this mystery is unraveling, and then eventually Christopher Lee comes into it, and Christopher Lee is the unapologetic, decadent, to our eyes, our modern eyes, depending on what you believe, decadent noble who has introduced this belief system, and these people have bought all into it because they believe it brings them prosperity. And
this was it. His grandfather, his great grandfather established this isle in their practice of animal husbandry.
Yeah, and from there, we come to find out that there is a certain ritual that happens on May Day that has to do with the pagan.
Look up the origins of the maypole if you don't know.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to leave it at that because there are some big twists that happen here, some big reveals, but all of that is tied into it, and it all has to do with what they believe and what is really going on the island. And I don't want to ruin it past that because there are major spoilers at that point. But I think that pretty much sums up the general gist of what's going on. So, what do you guys? Is that good? You good with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So before we dig deeper into the movie, because I think there's a lot to unpack there, I want to start off with a few actors and at least one actress. And we're going to go around and talk about them, short or quick, depends on how long we take. And then from there, we're going to go in and break down the movie a little bit more. So I'll go ahead and start, and then we go around the horn. I'm going to start with, to me, the guy I thought who really drove this movie. I enjoyed his performance quite a bit, and that was Edward Woodward as Sergeant Howie. I thought he was engaging. I thought he came off as a guy who could have played James Bond in this film.
He would be the equalizer on TV years later.
Yeah.
Before Denzel took over the franchise. I like to say, the tagline of this film should have been Dracula meets the Equalizer.
I thought he was very forthright. I was frustrated with him at times because at times I think he crossed over that, I think Steve was alluding to this. He crossed that boundary from being outraged government official, as a police officer, to being outraged Christian, which, to at least to my American sensibilities and my libertarian sensibilities, is not something that I appreciate. I understand it, but I don't, appreciate it. But I understood it too because he's sitting there looking at a lot of the things he's looking at, which were just shocking, And not only that, he's got beautiful women left, right, and center throwing themselves at him, and he passes all the tests. And I'll leave it to you to decide whether that's a good or a bad thing that he passes those tests. So with that, I'm going to go around real quick just for your thoughts on him, and then we will move on to another character of Steve's choice. So, So what do you think of Edward Woodward?
I think the actor was fine. I think he did a really good job. I mean, he definitely has that heroic presence. He looks like this guy who is the modern version of the Shining Knight, coming in. That's what he believes he is, and that is, the way he kind of presents himself in this movie. And I thought that was good. The character did frustrate me for the reasons that you got into, and it's like there is definite reason to have moral outrage. And I can definitely understand why he's frustrated that he's being stonewalled at every turn because he knows everybody's lying. And I think he kind of takes it a little bit too far at various times with him being outraged by by some of their practices. And while definitely some of their practices are terrible, yes, human sacrifice is bad. I mean, you probably don't want free love does not usually end well in the long run. Okay, granted that, but I think that there are various times, particularly in his encounters with Summerisle, where he kind of comes across as a a little bit too, I don't want to say quite fanatical, but I would say overzealous at times. And that's but at the same time, I kind of understand that he's meant to be kind of dumb, a bit dim. And there are times when he does make decisions that are a bit dim, like, why are you telling this guy that you're going to go and blow the whole lid on everything that he's doing? He's going to stop you. And you then find out that that's why he was chosen.
I think
that's why he was selected, because he is a bit dumb.
I think he considers himself.
He's single-minded.
Yeah, he's single-minded. Yeah. He's a bulldog. He's a classic English bulldog cop.
And he's too forthright, too honest.
Yeah. It's just like you don't have to tell them everything you're doing. You really don't.
It's also like a product of that society. When you think like Britain is like hitting like they're coming off of what they think is the pinnacle of their society, and they're in the modern age, and you just don't expect what's going on here. He doesn't have the tools to deal with it at all. This is so far outside of his boundaries, and he just becomes reactionary. And it's like in some of these older movies, like and I'll see this in some movies today, is like somebody will stupidly tell the bad guy, like they've like, oh, there's something wrong about it. Like, you know what, I'm going to call the cops on you, and they turn around. What happens? They get hit over the back of the head with a chair leg because they told the person what they were going to do, because they don't expect normal people to act malicious or like murderously violent. But that's what you kind of should have.
That's actually what I thought was going to happen that night. It's like, especially after, it seemed like Summerisle was kind of giving him a vague threat. Well, since you're no longer going to be here after tomorrow, I was just like, because I'm going to have you killed, and that doesn't happen. And that was the one thing that I was thinking, okay, what's going on? And then you find out, there's a reason why they didn't do that. And what they did do made sense, when you start really putting it together. This character, and honestly, I think it's like both sides are equally faithful. They both have different beliefs, and they are both absolutely driven to them. And they are, at lockstep, and neither will give. And that's really the conflict. Because, I mean, honestly, it's like, if you give up, maybe the murdering part on the one side, and on the other side, maybe if you aren't quite so judgmental, maybe there might be peace, and, they'd all get along. But because neither is willing to budge an iota on what they believe, you have this, outcome that you get, which I think is really interesting. And it's also very instructive to watch as well.
Now, going to Jeff, I'm going to add a little wrinkle. One of the things that I found, I'm not going to say odd, But what I was rooting for him to do was at one point in the movie when it became obvious that something bad had happened to the girl, whether you know it or not, and there are a whole host of people involved in a cover-up or a conspiracy of some sort. If it had been me alone on an isolated island without a weapon, yeah, I would have gotten the hell off that island and brought like 40 other coppers.
I got a plane parked out there.
Yeah.
Here.
So
yeah, I mean, why does he not have a radio?
Yeah.
Did you have a radio on your plane?
I think it's just the culture they have coming from Great Britain, where they don't have a gun culture over there. Their police are armed with sticks. They think a different way about how society and people and crime works, even though they should know better. There's no perfect utopian society, and when you are literally, he is an island on an island. He is the only guy. They've been lying to him from the get-go. And if you think this island has colluded to murder a child, he's thinking his badge, his authority is going to protect him. That is his shining armor. He thinks they will surely not kill a cop because then more cops from the mainland will come. But that's not going to work because they'll just say, well, we don't know what happened
very easily, and nobody would even question that.
Meanwhile,
I honestly thought they were going to rig the plane and make it explode in midair. Yeah, like, if I wanted to kill him and quiet silence him, that's how I would do it.
It's like, get your ass out of there, man.
You know what, Steve? It's not just his single-mindedness. I think the one of Howie's biggest fatal flaws is he lacks the imagination to consider the improbable.
Right.
And that's his downfall.
He is very straight. I would say too straight and narrow, and he doesn't think outside of the box in any way.
Yeah, he's very Ned Stark.
Yeah,
he's very Ned Stark in that respect.
Yeah, that's a good.
Tells who is so stupid and honest that he's stupid and honest. I'm sorry, but it's true that he tells Cersei Lannister, "Oh, I'm going to report all the bad things you've done, that you killed people." It's like, oh well, okay. So
yeah, that's going to end totally well for you. Oh wait,
it's like, oh, you think I already killed the first hand? What makes you think I won't kill the second hand?
Yeah, it's like sometimes, yeah, it's like it's horrible to say, but it's like sometimes being too honest is a detriment, especially in these types of situations.
And there's a warning there about, and there's a warning in that about society. No matter how good you think your society might be, you might have this grand society. There's this I know you'll remember the name of the bookstore, like Those Who Walk Away from Amelia. They've got this perfect
by Ursula Le Guin. Totally read that story.
Right. So they have this perfect society, and you find out it's run off the torture of a child to create this utopia, and this goes on and on and on. So there's always going to be some underbelly, because the world we see here, whether it be pagan or Christian, there is still a sinful sort of thing that goes on in the world. You're never going to have this perfect utopia. So the sergeant thinks he's protected by that, and the people on the island think they're protected by that because they've got a few generations in. He's got all of this British history backing him, and both of them
he's
are
got God on his side. I think that's another big part of it.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely get into that. We were having a good backstage discussion about that.
So, all right. So let's go. Let's pick another character. Steve, I'll let you pick a character, an actor or actor.
I got to go with Summerisle. I mean, he's just too interesting. I mean, and I will, like I said, I think he's the great Christopher Lee.
Yes.
Which is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this one, because Christopher Lee is one of those that elevates even a bad movie. Even Castle of Fu Manchu, which is terrible as it is, at least had the benefit of having Christopher Lee as Fu Manchu.
It certainly gives Jeff a lot of options if he chooses to go that way.
Yep. Yes, it does. Yeah, that's the other thing too. I wanted to give. Yeah, plenty of
somebody.
Great movies. Yep. A lot of good movies, a lot of bad movies that he's been in too. But in this particular case, I just thought that the Summerisle character was really interesting. Yeah, he's ridiculously decadent. He is that decadent noble type. But I kind of like how he deals with Howie. I mean, he doesn't lose his cool. He never sort of breaks character, as it were. He's always somebody who's very dignified and sort of keeps that sort of regal standing, and that's Christopher Lee. The way that he's playing that character, but he also comes across as somebody who genuinely believes what he's doing is right, which I really find interesting. Because if you look at like the one with Nicolas Cage, I mean, they do horrible stuff to the Nicolas Cage character, like horrible, and it's like, yeah, those guys are evil. When it comes to Summer Isle, I don't necessarily think he thinks that he's evil. Like and that's kind of that's the worst of it. He does terrible things, convinced that he's good and that he's doing good and that he's enlightened, and that makes him one of the most dangerous kinds of villains you can find. And man, does Christopher Lee deliver it? And always it is with that gravitas that he brings. We have talked a number of times about how charisma really elevates a performance and elevates a character and really makes a character work. And with villains, a lot of times it makes people who should be absolutely detestable likable, as we saw with Sean Connery in The Great Train Robbery. And I think that what Christopher Lee does with Summer Isle is on that level. I cannot hate this guy. Can't hate him because Christopher Lee does such a damn good job in making him a sympathetic character, that we understand what his viewpoint is. That it's kind of hard to dislike him even if he does things that are horrible.
There was one point where he was describing their viewpoint, and Howie says, "What about Jesus?" He's like, "Oh, there's a dead God," and I was like, to me as a Catholic, that's offensive as hell. But the way he said it. It sounded like a reasonable argument, even though I reject it, completely.
Yes.
So I get what you're saying there.
He never kicks Howie out, even though Howie is raising a stink in the place. He never kicks him off the island, even though he could. It's just, perhaps you should, you can go somewhere else and do this sort of thing.
Yeah. We don't want to
I think
why.
It was like he's describing their society. He says like Summer Isle is where the old gods are alive again. And when he says like, what about God and Jesus? Like, and he just like waves up, oh, well, he's dead. And he means like he's dead on this isle. I don't know what his thought about society is.
It's probably Nietzschean type of thinking. God is dead. He shall remain dead.
Well, what? He reminds me, this isle reminds me very much of M. Night Shyamalan's The Village, where I think Summer Isle, 3 generations back, decided to reject the society he was living in. And like, for whatever reason, we don't get into that, but they decided like, the old pagan ways are better than what I'm seeing in this modern Christian world. And they decided to put that together, and now they're having a problem. But they still have all of their faith, because this is the first big test of this old new society that they're going through.
I thought that they kind of did get into why his grandfather introduced the old gods back here, because the pre-existing society was so stuck in their ways and on subsistence living on fish and rocks that he had to give them a new dynamic, a new belief structure in order to embrace this new science that he was bringing in. But then, unknowns to him, his father kept it up out of love for the grandfather, and now the grandson is a true believer, which is, I think it says a lot about belief.
It is such a, story-wise, it's such an interesting, ironic conflict there of science and paganism uniting, which is normally not what you see, like science and religion, like going together like oil and water. And here the two have kind of evolved to this whole new thing.
Now, I do have one pushback on so both of you are talking about how, we've been talking about he's a believer and all this stuff, but I have one pushback. I thought there was one crack in the character, and I think this was deliberate.
Okay.
And it's when Howie pushes back, and I'm trying to figure out how to say this without spoiling too much, but he points at Christopher Lee and says, when what you're doing to me doesn't work, the next person that I'm for is you.
Yeah. Yes.
The look on his face at that point, he knows that that's true.
Yeah.
He knows it in his heart, and he's praying.
And I like that scene too, because right before that, when they have their confrontation on the cliff face, and you can see like the the genteel mask slips, and Lee is talking about, what this has all been leading up to, and he's speaking to Howie with tremendous contempt now. There's no more being polite. There's no more mask. It's total mask off. Like, this is what I think about you and yours, your society, your God, everything. This is how it's going to be, and we have played you to get you to this point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely. All right. Let's move on to Jeff. Pick another actor or actress and a character. So.
I guess I'm going to go with Naked Girl.
Which one?
Britt Eklund?
The main one, Britt Eklund, who plays the Tavern Keep's daughter, because she has a very important function in both the story and the island. Now, she is there in this pagan island. She brings, she helps boys become men, is one of her functions.
Yeah.
She is the fertility goddess. Like, she brings you into manhood. They have this opening scene, which, again, like a piece of music that might have gone on a little too long, but it was a very important thing that gave you a big hint to some of the things that are going on, where they have this song about the Tavern Keep's daughter and like what a slut she is, and everybody in the village has ridden this particular bike, that sort of thing, and she doesn't get offended, and nobody is offended by it. They're all reveling in it because it's the truth. She is the most beautiful, the most sexy, the most sumptuous woman in town. She's in the prime of her life. She is ripe as a Georgia peach, all this stuff. And that's totally acceptable in this society. This is what they do. If you're going to have a young man lose his virginity, it's kind of like Christopher Lee talks about Lord Summerhouse talking about, like, these young girls trying to get impregnated by the fire guys. Like, oh, would you rather have your daughter impregnated by some acne-scarred teenager or by like the living spirit of a fire? What would be cooler? And so the men lose their, for lack of a better word, maidenhead, if you will, to this beautiful woman. And she is one of the great temptations of the film for Sergeant Howie, because this film is not just a battle of cultures. It's not just a battle of times. It is distinctly a battle of faiths. And it's very reflective of the very founding of England. How the Christians eventually superseded the pagans. And now we are having a reversal of roles here. And Sergeant Howie is so uber Christian that he is in fact a virgin. He has never had sex because he has never been married. He is as Christian as it gets in the context of this film and his Catholic ideals and everything. And he is savagely tempted by all the sexuality. They're like,
he is Sir Galahad, dealing with the women near the Gale's Peak, and I mean, it's the same kind of temptation.
I can take it. You'll get
Let me sample the peril.
Yeah.
And then do oral sex.
Yeah.
But it's a really, of all the pieces of music in this movie that Steve doesn't like, this one I thought was the most important and the most impactful, because there is so much going on here. This is one piece of music that doesn't feel like it's kind of played very naturalistically in the background. This is a dramatic scene played for the drama as she attempts to seduce this officer in his final test. Like, will his faith hold out? Will his values hold out? Whose will is going to win out here? Watch the movie to find out precisely what happens.
Now, all right, before I move on, are there any other characters that you, or actors or actresses that you absolutely don't talk about?
Far too many.
Okay.
Yeah.
This film is low.
Yeah, I feel like we could. I don't feel like there's anybody so impactful that they need detailed discussion.
So the first question I have to ask all of you is Howie a martyr? Jeff?
Absolutely. I think when I was actually going to ask you guys this question at the end, I'm going to ask you now as I answer your question. Without trying to give the movie away, even though this is a very old movie, I still think because it's an old movie, there's plenty of people who've never seen it. And even if you've seen the Nicolas Cage film, give this one a watch. I think you'll be surprised by a number of things.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you guys, which of these opposing forces do you think won? And in my estimation, in the moment, in the climax, I actually think both won by their viewpoints. I think Howie is indeed a martyr. He remains resolute throughout, all the way up to the climax of the film. Even as the Islanders are celebrating, he pronounces against them. He prophesies against them. He calls down judgment against them as they are celebrating this. But you hear both groups singing their own hymns, praying to their own gods throughout the climax of this. And so I think Howie's definitely a martyr.
I have an interesting answer to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
I think he definitely thinks he is. They definitely portray him as one, particularly towards the end. I felt like he definitely has that flavor of it about him. And I will say at that point, it kind of feels like, Howie has a transformation. Like all of this has made him awaken to wisdom that he didn't have previously. And he kind of sees what the long term of this is. He actually starts finally thinking out, what situation he's in and what everything's going on. And I feel like that's a good character journey. But to get more to your question, I think let's put it this way. I think this village won in the short term. I think Howie wins in the long term. Right. That is the point of the sacrifice.
My answer to that is, and this is going to sound wishy-washy until I explain it, I'm going to say it depends. It depends on this, because
it is definitely a subjective question, especially the way that it's framed.
From the way the movie ends, it's unknowable at the moment.
Yeah.
But for Howie, it's unknowable, period. I will never know if he stayed true to his faith and ascended, and that actually happened. I can't know that from where I'm at right now. I can have my beliefs, but I can't know that. But
that's faith, isn't it?
And to the rest of the world, there are some people that will mourn his loss, but the world will go on. Society will go on without Howie. They'll find a replacement. I think so. The potential for loss is almost zero for that society that he represents. However, the potential for loss from the Somerset Isle side is humongous. And we even see this in history where because they're looking for tangible physical results. And if those results don't come, and this happened to other Jewish societies like in history, in like the Germanic period, the amount of death that started coming to try and appease and bring fruit was alarming. I mean, in the Germanic tribes, they were sacrificing 200, 300 people at a time sometimes.
Man, it's long before you ramp up to being Aztecs,
Yeah. So,
I will say from your point of view, the reason why the end is unknowable is because the film actually doesn't take sides. There is no proof of any actual mysticism, whether you believe in Christianity or paganism. It doesn't take a side. It doesn't play favorites. It just presents this in the most documentary yet movie-style fashion possible, and it leaves us, the audience, to decide if we can.
Based on what we believe, So we're imposing like our own religious biases on this matter of faith, which I think is really, really interesting.
But this is where, and this is one of the things we were talking about behind the scenes. So let's get into this discussion now. This is one of the things that got me in, and this is gonna be a little bit of spoiler. So spoiler warning, everybody. We're gonna probably spoil a little bit here. But
for a 50-year-old.
One of the things that got me was I want to know. I want to know what happens in the rest of the story. I mean, this was the part where I was into it. Now they've captured my attention, and I was like, well, damn it, show me what's going on in November. What happened with the crops? Because if those crops didn't come in November, I want to see what happened after that.
Yeah, it was funny. Behind the scenes, Nim was like, he wanted a definitive answer. He wanted to see something bloom, background in the foreground.
Or at least be tease me, like Inception, where you show like a flower bloom. Doesn't mean it fruits, but
it's like,
it shows me some
top is wobbling.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, so give me something like that, because and it's not, and even if they showed that, it doesn't mean that the pagans were right and that paganism is the right answer. It just shows that,
Right.
well, they lucked out this time, maybe. It depends on your point of view. It still depends, but at least I can see it. Or if it doesn't luck out, Somerset better get his ass off that island because he's the next one to go. So, you know.
Yeah. And I kind of like the thought that maybe Howie sowed some divisions within the group with the things that he said, because you guarantee you it's going to linger in their heads, and you know it's definitely going to linger in Summerisle's heads because it's like they may come for me next. What should I do? You know, and he's going to be looking at everybody with are they sharpening their daggers trying to kill me? That is that's going to end badly.
It's like you said, Steve. Like you could see that crack in his veneer, like when Howie hit him with that.
Yeah, and I think that I'll be honest with you, it was a little shocking because that was a particularly pointed piece of insight from Howie right at the moment where he's about to be sacrificed.
Let me get a little bit into this because I think they're playing with the concept of the fool. They have him. He ends up wearing the costume of the fool, so he's playing that role in this ceremony. But the thing is what is the fool? The fool is not just somebody who is kind of stupid and doesn't know anything. But if you look at the works of Shakespeare, particularly, the fool is presented as somebody who outwardly seems foolish, but he has wisdom that underlies that, and he is often the one who sees the truth in a way that the other characters don't. So Howie, by wearing the role of the fool, has become that wisdom by the end. Like he has tapped into that, and he is pointing these things out. So I think that is very intentional and very symbolic.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that they did that because culturally, they Christopher Lee even calls him a fool. It's like you're the fool. We've led you here. We've led you astray. We've controlled your every thought, deed, and action. He points that out very clearly. But as Steve said, when you look at the monarchical structure of history, who was the one guy who could tell the king the deal? The fool. The only person allowed to speak truth to power was the fool. And I think, Steve, you hit on something I hadn't considered before, because, how he gets decked out in his white robes, and there is this elevation of his character, he's risen to this sort of sainthood, like as Nim said, the martyrdom. And saints have wisdom beyond the mortal men. As I've said, he's prophesying. So the prophets are getting the wisdom from God. And now he speaks truth to power for the first time. He sees, like you said, he sees more than he has. And he has that foreknowledge. And I love the allegory of the fool, because that's what the fool can do. They thought, the fool was just the guy you kick around, you make fun of. But he's not. The fool is the wisest person in the kingdom, because he knows what's going on, and he has to know what's going on because it's his job to mock everybody.
See, now that was the thing I was going to say, and I agree with you. I think your point about prophecy is true there at the end. It's almost like in his death, in his role, and if we look at it that way, we could kind of fast forward and say that things are not going to end well for this group on the island. So, things are not going to turn out well, and the society is going to tear itself apart. So, we'll see. We'll never know. But
I had very much the same idea about the. We also discussed this behind the scenes a little bit. The movie The Village, where all these people come together because they had violent incidents. Back in the towns, as they called it, and they create their own insular society. And it goes fine for a few generations, but then what do we see? We see Adrian Brody's character develops mental deficiency. Is this because there's already not enough genetic diversity? Is there interbreeding going in? I tend to think yes. I tend to think The Village, this is what's eventually going to happen. This is going to be the ultimate devolution and breakdown of this society. And I think Summersal's or Howie's pronouncement is the future of this particular isle as well. That's my take.
I've got a couple more questions. So the next topic I wanted to go to, I'm going to throw this to Jeff first, but we'll go around. We like to talk about production. So production value on this film. I think there's several different ways to go, but I'm going to go Jeff first. and we'll go around the horn on this one. So.
You know, it's funny. It's weird. They have production value, but it's not production value that comes from actually doing things. I think the production value comes from the fact that they are in England, and this is a very English film. Like you said, it's all pubs and taverns and churches and all these great historical edifices. It's like, do we have to build anything? I don't think we do. I think the only thing we need to build is the flipping Wicker Man. You know, so the production value is baked in. All they needed to do really was to point the camera, light the scene, get things going. But I'm sure if Lance was here, he would agree. I mean, like they do a good job with that stuff, but most of it doesn't feel like a movie. Like Steve said, it feels very BBC production, which, mind you, is very high production value. But again, it's that naturalistic feeling, that capturing of reality. And there's only a few key moments for me where it feels really like it has that sort of a cinematic feel to it, the movie feel to it. You know, the seductive dance, you know, the reveal of the Wicker Man, the final ceremony at the end. But so much of this just feels like, you know, you're sticking a camera in a room and you're watching what people are doing. So for me, it's a weird thing to describe the production value because everything is there to see. It's all sumptuous. It's all beautiful. The colors there, the scenery's there. All the props are in place, but at the same time, I don't feel like they really had to dress up the set much, if you will. I think they just had all these wonderful, beautiful locations to work in, and they used them to maximum effect.
Interesting. Okay. Steve, what about you?
I think the production values are pretty solid for what they are. I mean, it definitely has that flavor of a 1970s British movie or British TV show. And you definitely see, like, with some of the interior shots, they do, like, some of the camera work in a way that you see on something like a classic Doctor Who, where they'll just kind of, like, hold the camera on this one character for, like, maybe a few seconds while, you know, the expression becomes the dominant thing. You know, their expression changes and they start focusing on that. You know, it's one of those things that you see, like, in BBC shows all the time. And it really works here because a lot of times it's the little things, because nobody's telling you the truth about anything. You have to glean little bits and pieces from all of the characters that Howie talks to. So I feel like that style really works. I do share, like, I will say the one thing about the credits that kind of got me, and I wish they had fixed this, was I wish they had used a song that went through the whole credits, because it's like halfway through. The song abruptly changes to some other song, and I just kind of felt like it doesn't feel natural, and it took me a little bit out of it. So that was like one of the things I wish they had fixed. But I mean, for the most part, yeah. I mean, and yeah, they saved a lot of money, and they were able to focus the money that they did have on the building of the Wicker Man and the props, and, you know, making sure that all of the Mayday elements look reasonable, look accurate. And it does feel, I mean, at the end of the day, like a found footage film or a documentary, you know, or something in that vein. And because they keep everything so close and personal on Howie and all of these other people that he's interacting with. And so for what they're doing, I think it absolutely works.
I will say that a couple things struck me about this movie. One is that there really isn't a cinematic score. There is a soundtrack. There are different movies and songs that go along with it, so there's no cinematic score. So that right there sets a definite. It's a choice, you know. And it might be a big choice for money, but it had a feel to it. You know, that there was a lack of this score, and so right away, I feel like I'm more, like Jeff was saying, watching a documentary of real life than I am watching a movie. You know, that's one. Two is that there is a very dreary, isolated, Scottish village look to everything. It's dirty. Lance would love that. You know,
Yeah.
It's very practical.
all of that is going on. I thought it shot well. There's no real fancy camera shots here. In fact, a lot of the times, a lot of shots are seen with one, maybe two cameras, and that's it. You know, and so I say this in the best way possible. I said this off air. It felt like a student film. It felt like something that was done. It was a passion, a labor of love, done with limited resources, but put together to tell a specific story with a specific
I
vision.
think you need
Without
to.
having a ton of resources.
I think cinematically, you need to go back a little bit further. If you look at oh blast, what's his name? Woody Allen. If you go back to old Woody Allen films, there is a lack of camera movement in the 70s and early 80s. And so a lot of things end up being shot like this. I don't know if he's influenced by British cinema or not, but it's very much almost shot like a stage play in a lot of ways. And I think that's because one element is you're working inside of actual structures. You don't have the fourth wall that's absent that you can do camera movement. And we're really not seeing any real camera movement with this, which again, with the lack of score, of course, gives you that feeling of just, I'm kind of uncomfortably stuck in here. But I think that plays into that. And so it's not a unique style, but it's a style.
Oh, yeah, I hear you.
Very much film.
Yeah. And so that really gets to the last point, which is I really think this was a 60s movie that was made in the 70s. And I say that because, and this is going to lead right into my last question before we get out of here, which is, to me, this movie felt like a suspense movie, or a movie that was suspenseful, but was really about an examination of societal themes, which is something
and faith as well, but yeah.
Which is something they did a lot in the 60s. I mean, there was a lot of introspection and deep thoughts types of exercises going on in the 60s. Versus, and this is going to lead into my question, is this a horror movie? Horror movies, as I know, even in the 50s and 60s, you've got lots of suspenseful music. When it's time to be scared, you have the you've got lighting, you've got shadows, you've got effect, you got all sorts of stuff going on. And you carry that forward all the way through today. I mean, there are elements that I associate with a horror movie. But is that to say that a suspense movie can't be a horror movie? No, because I count, for instance, Wait Till Dark as a horror movie, even though it's probably technically a suspense murder mystery. So it's an interesting question, and I don't know that I have an answer, which is why I wanted to ask the question to the two of you. So I'm going to go to Steve first. Is this a horror movie? And why? For you, one way or the other.
Not a typical one.
Okay.
And I think it probably starts off being one thing and then kind of morphs into another. And we've kind of seen, as well with Life Force, that it starts off being one thing and then it becomes a very different thing. And I think this is kind of a similar situation. It starts off being a police investigation on this creepy island, and you're getting to know all these people in the society and all of this. There's not a lot of horror in those scenes. There's some creep factor. There's some stuff that kind of makes you, sort of not trust anybody and makes you raise your eyebrows. But, there's no jump scares. There are no moments when the monster's coming out and attack you with a knife. There are no Michael Myers moments in it. But what it leads into is horrific. And I think that's where the horror is. The horror is a very human situation leading to this horrific outcome, this very murderous outcome. And that is where the true horror is. Because it's like, could this happen? Could people actually have this reaction and this societal shift? Where they're willing to kill people for what they think is just. For what they think is right by their God and by their society. They don't think they're evil, and they're doing evil things. And much like, and Jeff said, in the style of, those who walk away from Omelas, which was Ursula Le Guin's thought experiment about utopia. And yeah, I mean, is the price of utopia worth it? And when you see something this horrific, and that's a question you have to, along with all the other ones, you walk away from. And that's where the horror is, but it's also instructive type of horror.
I thought there was an opportunity. Before I go to Jeff, I'm just going to throw in my point, and this is why I'm so conflicted. I thought right at the end there was an opportunity for this to be a true horror film if we had seen horror in the psyche and reactions of Howard. But that's not who his character was. His character fled for his life in his own way, but then went to his life cursing them and went out like a Christian boss, quite frankly. You know, I mean, he went out a man of faith. Um, I think he was sad. I think he didn't want to die, but I think he was resigned. And so those four elements were there. So that's why I'm conflicted, because I think it was a horror situation. It was a suspenseful situation for the whole movie. So now with that said, I'm going to go to Jeff, because I think Jeff has a different take on this, and I definitely want to hear what he has to say too.
I absolutely do. I don't think this is a horror movie, even though it's often touted as a horror movie. It's definitely got a horrific story. It has a horrific element, but you know, and I'm okay with you know, film stories breaking new ground, trying new things. But to your point about the lack of a score and the lack of certain things going on, guys, there are things that you expect to have in a horror movie. If you have an action movie, you expect a certain level of action. You expect maybe gunshots, maybe explosions, maybe a lot of kung fu, something like that going on. All of those together makes the most exciting thing, of course. John Wick, anybody? So there are tropes within any genre, and particularly the lack of score does help. It really solidifies that you are in a horror movie. We know that movie is used to generate music is used to generate certain emotions in us, no matter what the genre is, and it's particularly important in a horror movie because it starts putting you on edge before you know the monster or the killer is even on screen. You start getting that unsettling, discordant music. You know, things like that are applicable. You start using the light and shadow. You start getting some, you know, deeply noirish effects, the chiaroscuro, that sort of thing. None of these elements are there. This is horror in bright daylight. This is the horror of a possible existence that is occurring in real time, as far as we're concerned as viewers, in front of us. And real life is horrific in a completely different way. We don't tend to think of it as horror because we live it. We have good and bad in there, and this is obviously a very terrible situation. But I can't really call it a horror movie because even when I look at things like The Village and Midsommar, which are the closest films to this, you know, these spiritual successors to The Wicker Man, they have these elements. We have the light and the dark. We have the music. We have the setups. We have the things that let us know, even if the characters in the film don't recognize it yet, that there's an underlying danger that's there, that we as the audience get to know that. You know, it's the whole Hitchcocking thing. If two guys are in a room, they don't know there's a bomb underneath the desk, but we do. We need that as the audience. So I think it's important to have those tropes in there to really specifically be for a film to be considered part of the horror experience.
Absolutely.
I will point out one thing really quick, and that is that if there is a monster in this movie, it's the entire society of Summer Island.
Yeah.
Mm.
And to give all of you viewers
adds to the
of what we're talking about, there are two different movies. There's a scene in this movie where a casket is exhumed, and inside the casket is a dead animal. But this scene takes place during the day, no score, and you get the impression you're like, well, what is going on here? It's a question of puzzlement, of the mystery deepening. There is some suspense involved with it. I'm going to contrast that with another movie, The Omen, where it's raining outside. There's lightning crashing down. There's an element of danger. They're in a creepy, dilapidated graveyard at night. They pull up a casket and they find a dead jackal inside a coffin.
Yeah.
It creeps you the hell out, and you're scared because the music reaches a crescendo, the lightning crashes, a dark dog comes around. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. Two very similar scenes of what's going on, but the way it's lit, the way it's shot, the way it's scored, the elements that are there, you know, that's why it's kind of difficult to say that this is a horror movie. And I tend to
This
agree
movie
with
does not tell you that it's a horror movie, and I think that
Yeah.
that's very different from other similar things that Jeff mentioned.
But
And
it's
it's like, and we're like,
movie.
we never see characters really respond in horror. You know, even Howie, with everything he goes through, he doesn't respond with horror. I mean, like he he has a moment when he sees the Wicker Man and he starts begging and pleading to God. And that's like the closest thing we get to horror in the film before he just turns around,
Yeah.
turns the situation around for himself.
Yeah. Before that, it's
But
mostly moral revulsion than anything.
right.
Exactly.
But like, when Hitchcock first wanted the death scene in the shower, he didn't want any music to it. Now, the crew disagreed, and the music coordinator went ahead and produced a piece of music unbeknownst to Hitchcock for that scene. And they watched it and they played it, and his idea is he wanted this to be as real and shocking, as startling as possible. So no music, just the sound effects, just the screams, just all the visuals. But even he had to agree. Like, he's watching, it's like, oh, something's missing, and I was like, well, let's try it like this. And they played the music, and he's like, damn it, that's better. You guys were right.
Bernard Herrmann was right, and Hitch was wrong on that one.
To this day,
Mhm.
if I go read, everybody
knows what that
Yep.
Yeah. So it's become synonymous with murder, basically, in our
Yeah,
society.
It's
same
just
with
like
the
if you
same with the Carpenter theme for Halloween. I mean,
Right.
there
Or
are
like
just
if you're-
some scores that have that.
you're on a
effect.
boat, you're in the water, and somebody goes dun dun, and like we
Yeah.
all start kind of like looking for fins,
Yep.
And that stuff matters. Like that gets down deep into your psyche, and it lives with you for the rest of your life.
And it's something you can't control, whether you like it or not. Those scores do something in our animal side of our brain, and it's powerful.
Visceral.
Yeah. Oh, did I lose my sound again?
No, I hear you.
We can hear.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, and I think it's a definite choice because this movie, most of the movie, I was like, it was like I was just watching, like you said, a documentary. I was like, well, what the hell's going on? Well,
You really
Lord.
do not get a horror flavor when all
Yeah.
you're hearing are these Scottish ballads in the background.
Yeah, and there were moments that could have had some horror elements to it, like when a little girl gets a frog popped in her throat. That's a fucked up situation. They could have done something with that to like freak you out a little bit, but
Or the
instead,
dead hair on the body.
I think maybe we can describe this like not so much as a horror, but maybe as grotesque reality.
that's a great description. I like.
Because
Okay.
because it's the unvarnished truth of the situation going on in this fictional setting.
I do have to give it.
It is the macabre that you get, from society totally breaking down, or or just kind of like turning against people.
But I think the suspense elements were well done, because I do think that the writing, like Steve said at the beginning, they tied it all together. So from a murder mystery aspect or a mystery aspect, that's well done because you hate to have loose threads. And the clues were there. It's just we couldn't put them together until the end. So that's great writing as an avid reader of mysteries.
Even things that seem dumb, that seem like dumb character decisions, turn out not to be dumb. I mean, they really thought those things out. I'm like, okay, you got me on that.
It all comes together in the end for sure.
Yeah. So as a work of suspense and mystery, I think it's very well.
Mhm.
And I can imagine, like back in 1973, seeing this for the first time with no clue what's going on. Can you imagine what it must have been like seeing that for these people? And then all of a sudden, like, I can see why they would consider it a horror, because by the time you get to the end, it's so friggin' shocking. It's so out of context from anything they've ever seen or experienced. It would have just slapped them all in their faces, and they'd have walked out like with like goosebumps.
Well, it's like people that call Faces of Death a horror movie. I don't think Faces of Death is a horror movie. It's shocking.
No.
It's gross, but it's not
Right.
a horror movie. So Cool.
A horror
All right.
movie implies they actually made something. This is just recording crap.
Yeah, exactly. All right, very cool, very cool. So that was our discussion of The Wicker Man from 1973. I'm going to go around to everybody for final thoughts, and then we are going to bail on out of here. So, final thoughts. I'm going to go to Jeff first. Jeff, final thoughts.
It's funny. Like I said, going back and watching this after having not watched it for a very long time, it is a little interesting to get through. Again, it's like, oh wow, okay, a lot of music. I was remembering it with my nostalgia and watching it. But I still think it's definitely worth the watch. It's a very unique film in the pantheon of cinema history as far as like thrillers and horror goes. It's unlike anything else of its time, and since anything that I see that's like this, I can't help but think has to be inspired by it. So I definitely think it's worth seeing. The performances we get out of the leads are extraordinary. Between Lord Summerisle and Sergeant Howe, and the sprinkling of the supporting characters, and there's so many supporting characters. Everybody plays it to a T, and you really feel like you're kind of living this experience with them. So, if you've never seen The Wicker Man before, as fun as crazy ass Nicolas Cage can be, and I absolutely love this phase of his career where he is willing, he is free to be as batshit as he wants to be. Check this film out. See the OG, and experience quiet daylight horror, if you will, the grotesquerie of society.
Awesome. Steve, what thoughts?
Yeah, I would say a lot of my thoughts are very similar coming through that. I mean, if you don't like musicals, you're going to struggle through first third. I'm not going to lie.
Well,
but if you,
it's not a musical. I mean, they weren't shouting out in a song,
I know. But it feels like a
close
musical.
Enough for
that's
Steve.
where the
It's
problem
like,
is. It's close enough. If you struggle with that, you're not going to like it. But once you get past that first third, and once you start getting the movie starts getting to the point, once Christopher Lee shows up, all of this, you start seeing a real story here that is worth watching. It's much like Life Force in that respect. If you have a certain amount of patience, and you can and you can drudge through it, you're going to get something really rewarding. And I definitely think this movie definitely I think offers something that the remake doesn't. Because the remake seems to have the approach that, it should be a horror film, and therefore we're going to make it feel like a horror film, even though that's not really what this movie was quite aiming for. I
would have been okay with that, but they didn't know how to make it a horror film.
That's the other thing too. So you're pretty much relying on Nicolas Cage doing the whole Nicolas Cage shtick, which is and all the memes, and all of that, and that's fun. But, it doesn't have the same depth to it that this movie has, in the sense that, they're really trying to say something about faith. They're trying to say something about society. They're trying, to say, something about culture clash and all of these sorts of things that are really deep and interesting. And they're giving you thought experiments, and they're making you think about, all of that. I mean, just look at the stuff that we all brought up. There is real depth to this movie. If you look for it and you're patient enough and you want to wait and see it. And even the end, it's like, we can't all agree on what it is. We don't know what happens, but this movie asks you to look at it from the perspective of faith. So a lot of what you're going to see in this movie is what you bring into it. It's kind of like the Dark Side Cave in The Empire Strikes Back. You bring what you take with you. And I think that those kinds of movies can be very, very rewarding, if you're willing to, take your time with it and sort of see, explore the issues that they're bringing about, look at the different perspectives, and find your own answer to it. And this is definitely a movie that does that very well.
Okay, very cool. I'm going to agree with you all, is that this movie was definitely worth a watch. In fact, I'll go one step further and say I will probably watch this movie at least one or two more times, if not more. And
really dig deep into it.
And this is going to sound weird, but bear with me here. This movie is like Richard II for me. I hate Richard II, the play. I don't like watching it. But there's some great storytelling in there, and there's quite a lot I can learn from the Bard by reading it and studying it. For those of you who don't know, I'm a horror writer, and I like to put mystery elements in my books and in my comics. Watching this movie and seeing how all of that was done and how they built suspense, I can learn a lot from this movie. Not to mention that there are some parts that were quite enjoyable, and I'm not talking about the naked women, although that was enjoyable as well. So, I mean, so that's all I say. All of that to say, not every movie is going to be like John Wick, where I sit down and I can watch that movie whenever, wherever, at any moment and enjoy it. But Can I get a lot out of this movie? Absolutely. Was this a worthwhile exercise to do? Absolutely. And can I learn a lot from this movie? Absolutely. And that's another part of cinema, you know? So is it a movie that it's going to be a daily go-to for me every Halloween? Probably not. You know, even Jeff, who likes this movie, you know, right off the bat, he's seen it before us, he said he hasn't watched it in many years. So, you know.
I haven't watched it in a couple of decades.
Yeah. So, with that said, I will go out on a limb and say if you haven't seen it, it's worth watching. It's worth watching just so you can get the experience and see what you take out of it, because there's a lot to take from it. There's a lot. This is one of those movies, like I said, it's the 60s movies. A lot of movies in the 60s make you look inside yourself and examine parts of yourself and then come to some decisions, which is a good thing, you know? So this is one of those movies, and I enjoyed that part of it. So I recommend it. You know, I recommend that you go out and watch it.
I love the fact that there are movies out there that, you know, are so old, but we still talk about them. We still wonder about them. We still analyze. We still argue about things that went on. And this is one of those movies. And I don't see a whole lot of that these days. So I'm always excited when I see a movie, especially in the modern context, that I know is like, I'm going to be talking about this film for a while.
Very cool. Absolutely. All right. So with that, we are going to wrap up this episode of Cinema Crusaders. Continuing on with our theme, Mr. Bracey here will be selecting a movie next week that features one of the actors.
Something ready, but there's such a huge cast. I'm still trying to decide.
Yeah.
Christopher Lee alone gives you a lot. So
yeah. He's got quite a choice to select from, but we will be doing a movie with one of the actors or actresses from this film next Friday at our usual time. And until then, to everybody out there, keep that popcorn warm, get that comfy chair comfy, and this weekend, sit down, grab yourself some of that popcorn, sit in that chair, and watch some cinema, and have a great weekend. On behalf of Cinema Crusaders, UCPA, click like, subscribe, and we're out of here, folks. Bye.
Later.